major reason I got into the Famicom as a system was because of the show Game Center CX. If you're not familiar with it, it's a Japanese reality show that's been on the air now for 20 years, and it features a lot of different segments about video games and nostalgia. But the main segment, the one that took over the series, is Orino no Chosenjo, or Orino's Challenge. In this segment, comedian and not especially good player Orino Shinya is given a retro game to play by the show's crew, and then he has to beat that game by the end of the day. We watch as he succeeds and fails, gets stuck on a single part for hours, makes discoveries about the game, and through it all, Orino takes on the game with some good-natured humor. I absolutely recommend watching it if you haven't, especially the roughly 100 episodes that I did the timing and editing on for the fan translation. Since I'm at the end of my Famicom project, I thought that a fun way to go out would be to take on a challenge of my own. Pick one of the difficult games from the Famicom's library that I haven't beaten before, and then go for it. I gave myself an 8-hour time limit, Orino usually gets around 14 hours, and see if I could pull it off. But which game to choose? There's a decent number of Famicom games that stymied me. Should it be something that's an endurance challenge? Maybe try to beat an acknowledged classic that I never could get to the end of. Well, in the end, the choice was obvious. The game that was used in the very first proper episode of Game Center CX. A game that is both beloved and notorious among Famicom fans. And that game is Sunsoft's Atlantis no Nazo. Atlantis no Nazo was Sunsoft's attempt to outdo Super Mario Bros. They created a sprawling platforming game with 100 stages and more secrets than any kid could ever hope to find on their own. The game is brutally difficult, known for its rapid and often unavoidable deaths, jumping that is incredibly rigid, an attack that is next to useless, and a lack of any way to continue when you do get a game over. The plot of the game puts you into the shoes of an Indiana Jones type who is exploring the ruins of Atlantis and looking for his lost master. Atlantis no Nazo is often pointed to as an early example of a Metroid-style game, as many of the stages had multiple exits, and players had to plot their own route through the game. Before taking on this challenge, I had played Atlantis no Nazo before, even tried to beat it, but this is a game that will push back pretty hard on you. I started the clock, popped in the cartridge, and my first thing to do was familiarize myself with the game again. Naturally, you start in Zone 1, outside, descending from a hot air balloon, and the only enemies here are bats that fly at variable heights and will sometimes poop at you if they're high up enough. I remember that if you go left from the starting position, there is a warp, but I didn't want to try to skip ahead while I was still getting my legs back. So I went to the right and had 2 doors. Shut doors have to be blown open with your bombs. They travel in a strange arc, and take several seconds before they explode. Taking the second door led me to Zone 11, a small chamber with 2 treasure chests. The treasures are a key thing that you need to find as you play. They give you a number of points and every treasure chest is different. For every 100,000 points you earn an extra life. It's usually the chests in small stages like Zone 11 that have enough points to give you an extra life. You start with 7 lives and can have a maximum of 9, so it's also helpful to not take some, so that you can have extra lives later. Zone 2 is a cavern with a bunch of little hills in it that are hard to jump around on, and here's where you'll encounter one of the major weaknesses of your weapon. The enemies here are hermit crabs that will drop their shells when you throw your bomb, and they can't be hurt when they're in their shell. So if you stop to try to take them out, you're probably going to run out of time. Instead, you can use the bombs to make them duck, at which point they can't hurt you either, and you can run right through them. Zone 3 brought me my first death, just over 2 minutes into the run. This zone is a series of ledges that you have to precisely jump over while fish jump out at you. The fish are just about the worst enemy in Atlantis no Nazo, as they'll inevitably leap up and get you while you're jumping. When you're starting out, they're going to cause you to die a lot, like I'm dying here. but there is a secret to them. They jump up every 7.5 seconds. So once you know that, you can watch the timer at the bottom of the screen, and then be prepared for them. Zone 4 is a cavern where skeletons will rise from the dead, and it's at this point that I make an important discovery. You can blow open the door that you came through, and go back to the previous stage. It's a technique that's absolutely vital to completing the game, no matter what route you take. Further into Zone 4, I spot my first power-up item. This light bulb will make your bombs illuminate dark stages. If you don't have it, then you could wind up stuck. Between Zones 3 and 4, I've lost all of my lives, and 6.5 minutes into the challenge, it's back to the beginning. This time, rather than taking the door from Zone 2 to Zone 3, I go further into Zone 2 and locate a door to Zone 9. Zone 9 is another small chamber with a treasure that will grant some extra lives, and a power-up that's an up arrow. If you collect it, then you can press up to give yourself 3 more points. Not the most exciting of items. The open door in Zone 9 takes me back a stage to Zone 8, a long hallway of pillars that require very precise jumping. It's easy to move too quickly on some of them and fall into the holes. I find a door to Zone 10 in Zone 8, but instead I double back and decide to go further on. And there I find a door to Zone 20, a mysterious realm with moai heads, and the word Nagoya floating in the sky. Nagoya is a hint that will take you to a secret final stage, but not the actual final stage. It's a reference to how many times you have to throw bombs while standing on different moai heads. But since I want to actually beat the game, I head out the door at the far end of Zone 20, and wind up at the start of Zone 8 again. This is another important point about Atlantis no Nazo. Hidden warps will take you to doors that you fall out of rather than step out of, and so you can't backtrack through them. There's several stages that filter into Zone 8 like this. With no other choice, I head on to Zone 10, and it's a stage of treetops that require absolutely precise jumping. It's here where I glimpse the most important power-up in the game, the star. The star renders you invulnerable to all enemies, but you lose it if you die by running out of time or falling into a hole. If you can get the star, then you can make a lot of progress. But for now, the star on Zone 10 is out of reach. After dying several times to the holes on this stage, I finally reach the door at the end and head to Zone 12, where immediately a bat poops on me, I die, and it's back to the beginning. Well, I'm sufficiently warmed up, so it's time to start using some strategy. I begin creating a map of all the doors between the zones that I can find. I quickly make it back to Zone 12 with a healthy stock of lives, and finally find out what that area is all about. White stone pillars and skeletons that pop out of them. The skeletons really demonstrate their jumping ability on this stage as well. Clearing that area takes me to Zone 13, where I first encounter the mummies. They're the toughest enemy in the game, as they take 3 bombs to destroy. They march straight towards you, and if they reach the edge of a cliff, then they stop and throw fireballs. This zone's also the first time I see the green slug monsters, but all they do is crawl along the ground. Not much of a threat. Zone 13 is a maze with a high, medium, and low path, a common layout for stages coming up. Making my way to the end here takes me to Zone 16, a land of a giant purple snake skeleton. You start at the tail end and eventually wind up at the skull. The snake is long, and I barely make it through this stage with enough time. Clearing that area gets me to Zone 19. Another maze stage, but this one's much longer and has a more complicated layout. Here I take advantage of the fact that you can go back through the door you came in, and use it to reset the timer several times after I collect treasure. At this point, I'm feeling pretty good. I'm making amazing progress on this run, and now I've reached Zone 21, a small cavern with the exit door right where I come in. However, it's been a very straight path. I haven't found any alternate exits, or places where I could go further and perhaps find another door. Atlantis no Nazo is hiding something from me. But this is just my first mapping expedition, so on I go to the purple caverns of Zone 23. With nothing really challenging me here, I'm starting to feel like this might be too easy of a game. Maybe I've gotten a lot better at Famicom games over the past few years. Zone 27 takes me outside to some high stone hills. And here, the fish are back. They get me once, but the hills are so high up that it's easy to avoid them as they jump from below. This stage is my first sighting of the mer people, who, similar to the fish, jump out from below, but they launch a fish out of their mouth at you, and then jump away. Between the fish and the mer people, you can often find yourself in a position where getting hit is unavoidable. I find 2 exit doors next to each other here, and the one I take brings me to Zone 28, the first dark stage. Without a bulb, I have to feel my way around and blow open the door that I came in from. Fortunately, I managed to avoid falling into a hole as I do this. And stage 28 is just marked down for further exploration later. Taking the other door brings me to stage 29, a flat, empty field of skulls. And the end of stage 29 brings me to the greatest challenge yet. 3 doors. There's also a power-up just past them, the microphone. The microphone will stun enemies if you shout into the Famicom's built-in microphone, assuming you're playing on an original Famicom and not the revised model like I am. So this power-up was useless for me. The far right door took me to Zone 31, a small chamber with a treasure that helpfully restocked some of my lives. The only exit was back to Zone 29 though, so I still had 2 more doors to choose from. This time, I took the middle door, and it took me all the way forward to Zone 42, the Black Hole. The most infamous stage in Atlantis no Nazo, because it's not really a stage, it's just a door that dumps you into a pit, causing you to lose your lives over and over again until it's game over. A brutally unfair ending to a run that had gone on a very long time. It closed out the first hour of my challenge. And if I had made that much progress in an hour, then Atlantis no Nazo was in the bag. I began the second hour of the challenge by targeting paths that I had bypassed in the previous big run. Last time, I found a shortcut out of Zone 2, but this time I decided to advance stage by stage, and in Zone 4, I found a convenient warp to Zone 25. Zone 25 is another one of those locations with treasure that you can use for extra lives, but also a power-up. And this one's a clock that makes your timer run slower. Very useful for some of those long levels. Zone 25 took me forward to Zone 33. Zone 33 is an area with ruins, mummies, and scorpions. And I didn't know it yet, but it's also the start of a pretty big problem. Clearing Zone 33 takes you to Zone 34, one of the more difficult, playable stages in Atlantis no Nazo. You're still in a set of ruins, but now you're dealing with flying fish and mer people. And if having enemies jump up from below wasn't enough trouble, this zone is also the home of some very irregular platforming. Your jump in Atlantis no Nazo is not the greatest. While you do jump variable height, there's really only 3 heights you can jump to, and your arc of your jump is dependent on if you're moving. You have a tiny sliver of air control as well, but just enough to not go flying off ledges if you have to drop down. Zone 34 proves fatal, but with the game over this time, I take advantage of the warp in Zone 1 because that goes straight to Zone 33. Zone 33 is a bit of a funnel. Almost all of the early routing that you can do wind up passing through it, which also means passing through Zone 34. And here's where my troubles really begin. After trying and failing to get through Zone 34 a few times, I decide to backtrack and use the regular door out of Zone 4, which takes me to the grasslands of Zone 7, complete with wasps and skeletons. But unsurprisingly, clearing Zone 7 takes me to Zone 8, which I've already been to. But taking this route does get me the light bulb and the opportunity to pick up that clock before doubling back through Zone 4. I'm starting to plan my route to pick up power-ups and then go back. After another hour of playing like this, I haven't even managed to get back to Zone 23. I'm doing a lot worse now. And I wind up banging my head against a wall for a long time. 3 hours in, still no progress. At this point, I need some kind of leg up, so I check a map. I haven't been able to find zones 5 or 6, and so I consult a map hoping that they'll have power-ups. The location of Zone 5 gives me a big clue to what I've been doing wrong. It's behind a hidden door in Zone 2, a door that only appears if you bomb exactly the right place. Atlantis no Nazo has a lot of these hidden warp doors, but they're mainly located around other doors. So if you know that, you should bomb around the door or at any suspicious spot that you come across, as it could be the path forward that you need. In Zone 5 I find a new power-up, the Super Bomb. The Super Bombs damage all enemies on the screen when they go up. It's very useful for clearing away some annoyances, though perhaps not as effective as you'd like, since it doesn't do a lot to mummies or hermit crabs. Still, it's the kind of thing that will help. Zone 6's entrance is hidden on Zone 3. I knew there was a secret exit in Zone 3, but I didn't remember where, and it's down this pit. Yes, there's also pits that you can fall down and suddenly get warped ahead. Zone 6 also had a power-up, the boots, and that's what I had been looking for. The boots allow you to walk on clouds, which doesn't sound especially useful, but in Zone 10 it allows you to get above the star power-up that makes you invincible, and then you can very carefully drop down onto it. More carefully than that. With the star in hand, the world is my oyster, and I quickly fly way ahead again. I make my way back to the triple doors in Zone 29, still indestructible, until I fall off the edge trying to collect a useless power-up. That doesn't matter though. I get to find out what's behind the final door. And it's Zone 32, an outdoor area with some convenient super bombs to replace the ones that I've lost. But because this is Zone 32, you know what's coming up next. I'm right back at Zone 33 again. And that means passing through the dreaded Zone 34. Hours of practice have paid off though, as I managed to clear the pillars and make my way to Zone 36. A dark area. Kind of. This stage is illuminated by flickering, and even if you have the light bulb, it doesn't have an effect. You'll have to feel your way through the maze here, but you won't be able to find a door. That's because Zone 36 uses the last warp trick from Atlantis no Nazo. On stages with black backgrounds, sometimes open doors don't have outlines. I stumble through the door to Zone 37 with seconds left. I'm now the furthest I've made it in the game, and it's a set of pillars similar to Zone 8, only now there are fish. And the fish quickly finish me off. But now I have a plan. Collect lives and power-ups in the early stages, get the star, and then all I have to do is not fall into a hole. How hard could that be? On one of my attempts to do this, I come across something unexpected in Zone 21, one of those invisible doors. This one takes me to the previously skipped Zone 24, a desert with mummies, wasps, and a very suspicious looking pit. Naturally, there's a door at the bottom of it that opens up when I bomb there, and that skips me all the way ahead to Zone 35, which is just a treasure room with a clock in it. Back to 24, where I take the regular exit, which drops me off at Zone 34. This time, I have the star, and Zone 34 goes down without a problem. I get all the way up to Zone 37 again, and that is where there's a problem. One misstep is all it takes, and then you're back to catching fish with your face. I'm now 4 hours into my challenge, and I've only taken the smallest of steps forward after that first hour. About an hour later, after many more failures, I do reach Zone 28, the dark zone that I need to check out with the light bulb. It's a good thing I didn't try to do anything here, because it's a stage with a lot of pits in it. Clearing it takes me to Zone 30, an icebound stage where you start out on a tiny little ledge. It's difficult to get enough speed up to escape that position. But once I did make it through, I found a door to Zone 32. So it was another path that just took me to the same place. However, this time, I actually made a bit of progress. I cleared the fish pillar room and wound up in Zone 43, another pillar room, only this time with slimes that would bounce back and forth. My star was lost, so I had to either catch them perfectly in an explosion, or somehow slip through their high-speed bouncing. By some miracle, I broke through to the 44th zone. Back outside among the treetops, but this time with wasps. With only one life left, I couldn't get through here, but Hour 5 was ending on a hopeful note. However, that was also the end of my progress. At this point, if I was going to have any hope of finishing, I'd have to try for the shortest route. A path that took me to collect the star, and then used a secret warp to send me far, far ahead in the game. I already knew how to collect the star. That was a 10-minute run through a series of levels that I'd been through many times before. The next trick was taking a secret warp out of Zone 10 where the star was. It's right past the regular exit door, and that warp takes me back to Zone 4. From there I use the far right door to advance to Zone 25, where I found the clock previously. And here I use another secret warp. The warp took me forward to 41, a tiny treasure room with nothing in it. Or was there? By bouncing my bomb off the wall just right, another door was revealed. And that door passed me through to Zone 94. A zone I'm not going to be showing because it has a constant flashing effect as the background. It's a bunch of pillars and fish again, just like this stage. Except on Zone 94, the fish jump out 3 at a time, there's constant merpeople, and there's the hermit crabs. I lose my star to a pit on that stage, and I get wiped out rather quickly. But now I've got a path, so I try again, and make it to the hidden exit door that takes me to Zone 97. This zone puts you at the bottom of a pipe with apparently no way out, except you can go up and above the top of the wall. You have to take a flying leap from there, and hopefully you pick the right direction. And I did. The rest of the zone is walking on clouds until you get to the exit door. Except I slipped up at the very end, something that lost me my star. But I still managed to make my way through Zone 97 and reach the door to Final Zone. All I have to do is make my way down a hallway and I win. Except there's statues spitting fireballs continuously. I've got enough lives though, maybe I could find a pattern? Even if I clear the first one, there's more statues right behind it positioned to make sure that it's all but impossible to get through without a star. So it's back to the beginning for me, but now I'm really close. Zone 1 to Zone 11 for the extra lives. Zone 11 back to Zone 1, and then into Zone 2. In Zone 2, take the exit to Zone 5 to get the super bomb, which will help me get everything else, plus top off my life count just in case. Back to Zone 2 again, and go to the Zone 3 door. In Zone 3, drop down the appropriate hole, takes me to Zone 6. In Zone 6, get the boots, and advance to Zone 8. Play Zone 8 straight to Zone 10, and in Zone 10, collect the star. Use the secret warp in Zone 10 to go back to Zone 4, and then use the far right door in Zone 4 to go to Zone 25. Take the clock just in case, pass through Zone 41, and then the secret warp to Zone 94. Walk through the fish monsters in 94 to get to 97, and then cross the clouds to reach the final zone. And in the final zone, all I have to do is walk right through the fireballs. I rescue my master and collect the treasure of Atlantis, getting that amazing ending of congratulations. And that's how you beat Atlantis no Nazo in 6 hours and 20 minutes. There are of course much longer routes that you can take, and I think it's reasonably possible if you had a full map, so that you could collect power-ups and rebuild your stock of lives as you go. But it's definitely not easy. Even the very short path that I took through the game is not something that you could pull off when you just start playing. Both the jumping and the bombs in Atlantis no Nazo are really tough to use, and you'll have to practice those a bit before you can even try that route. This is also a game that would be next to impossible to clear without assistance. In 1986, when it was released, kids were obsessed over it, trading hints on the playground, and early Japanese game magazines were full of advice. These days, you're not really getting hints as much as complete directions. But that's also how I managed to clear the game in my time limit. Atlantis no Nazo was a tough challenge, but I don't think there's really a lot of appeal beyond the challenge to this one. It has all of the clunkier aspects of that era of 8-bit gaming. Things that other developers would eventually figure out not to do. It's a game that benefited from being on the leading edge of the Famicom boom, where a lot of people would make platformers with not very good jumping, a next to useless attack, and obscure secrets that you were required to use in order to beat the game. There's not much reason for anyone these days to go back and play it, unless they're looking for a really hard game.